For years, the public believed royal jewelry was decorative, tradition without intention. But during one quiet engagement, Catherine stepped out wearing pearl earrings she had worn before. Yet something was different. The cameras flashed, commentators praised elegance, and the palace said nothing. But within hours, royal watchers noticed a pattern that should not exist. Not fashion, not coincidence. A message, repeated too precisely to ignore. Before we begin, please don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps us make more videos like this. At first, the observation felt almost trivial. A familiar pair of pearls reappearing where another choice might normally mark the occasion. Yet the context unsettled seasoned observers. The appearance came during a moment of unease, one of those carefully choreographed appearances where every word had already been negotiated before it was spoken aloud. The earrings were identical to ones seen before, but only during circumstances where the family faced emotional pressure behind closed doors. Veteran correspondents began quietly comparing archives, not out of suspicion, but out of instinct. Royal dress had always followed invisible rules: celebratory brightness for unity, heirlooms for remembrance, new pieces for new beginnings. Yet here, repetition replaced variation. A deliberate return to the same understated pearls where history suggested change. The kind of subtle choice that would never be announced, yet never accidental either. Within media offices, the topic never surfaced in briefings. Not dismissed, simply absent. When questions drifted near personal styling, answers moved quickly elsewhere. A polite redirection. Not secrecy loud enough to confirm anything, but quiet enough to encourage attention. The palace was comfortable discussing fabrics, designers, charitable symbolism, but not these earrings. Older courtiers would have understood immediately. For generations, the monarchy survived not by explanation, but by suggestion. Words commit, symbols imply, and implication grants protection. Jewelry, in particular, had long carried meaning far heavier than its weight. Grief acknowledged, loyalty reinforced, reassurance offered without vulnerability. Publicly, speculation faded as quickly as it appeared. Fashion segments moved on. Headlines chose safer narratives. Yet privately, conversations deepened. Observers began charting appearances against moments of tension. Sudden schedule adjustments, unexplained absences, strained family dynamics hinted at, but never admitted. The alignment became difficult to ignore. Not proof, but rhythm. And rhythm creates intention. The realization arrived slowly, almost reluctantly. These were not sentimental choices or aesthetic habits. The timing was too careful, too restrained, almost cautious. The pearls surfaced precisely when silence inside the family seemed loudest. A gesture visible to millions, but meaningful to very few. The monarchy, after all, cannot speak freely, but it can appear. And once observers began tracking when the earrings appeared, they discovered they never appeared randomly. Inside the monarchy, words are dangerous. A single sentence can create headlines, shift alliances, or provoke constitutional debate. So the royal family developed another language, one older than press offices and safer than interviews. A system of signals built into clothing, color, and jewelry. Most symbols are ceremonial, but some are personal. And the pearl earrings belong to a category the palace has never acknowledged publicly. For centuries, survival depended not on openness, but restraint. Monarchs learned quickly that silence could calm storms faster than explanations ever could. When controversy threatened stability, statements created consequences. Symbols, however, created interpretation. and interpretation allowed the crown to remain above confrontation while still communicating exactly what needed to be understood. Senior royal women mastered this discipline long before the modern media era. A brooch worn during tension, a specific shade during reconciliation, a familiar heirloom during mourning, gestures subtle enough to avoid official acknowledgement, but clear enough for those trained to recognize them. The public believed these traditions were sentimental. In truth, they were structural, a controlled vocabulary embedded within appearance. Jewelry carried the greatest authority in that vocabulary. Unlike clothing, it was never chosen casually. Each piece had permission, context, and memory attached. Some were reserved for unity, others for distance. A few existed only for moments of private significance disguised as public duty. The pearls Catherine wore belonged to none of the usual categories, which was precisely what made them remarkable. Within the institution, staff understood more than they could ever articulate. Preparation lists circulated before engagements, and occasionally an item appeared with no explanation attached, yet no one questioned it. The silence surrounding certain pieces wasn't confusion. It was discipline. The monarchy functions because not every meaning is spoken aloud, even among those serving it. Hierarchy also lived inside these choices. Royal women did not merely represent themselves. They represented position, alignment, and reassurance. Wearing a specific jewel could acknowledge authority without statement. Avoiding another could preserve peace without rejection. This silent negotiation kept relationships intact, where direct communication might fracture them. Over time, Catherine did not just marry into tradition. She inherited a language, not taught formally, never written down, but absorbed through observation and necessity. The more visible her role became, the more carefully that language had to be used. Because once symbolism is recognized, it cannot be undone. Every appearance becomes deliberate, and every repetition becomes memory. Yet the pearls did not follow ceremonial logic or hierarchy protocol. They appeared at moments too emotionally precise to belong to tradition alone, which meant they were not simply inherited signals, but chosen ones. But inheritance alone didn't explain the precision. Someone was choosing the moments carefully. When analysts placed every appearance of the earrings on a timeline, coincidence collapsed instantly. The earrings appeared only during 3 types of events: moments of absence, moments of conflict, and moments of transition. Never celebrations, never routine engagements. Always when the royal family faced something it refused to publicly address. The implication was unsettling. Catherine wasn't accessorizing. She was responding. The first alignment seemed almost accidental. A tense week, quiet adjustments to official schedules, and then the pearls appeared. Observers noted it, but moved on. Yet weeks later, another delicate moment surfaced. A shift in responsibilities hinted at, but never clarified, and the same earrings returned. Still, no confirmation, no acknowledgement, just repetition. By the third occurrence, it stopped feeling like style and started feeling like timing. Careful comparison revealed something even more uncomfortable. During joyful milestones, they vanished completely. New initiatives, celebrations, family unity events, not once did the pearls surface. They belonged exclusively to emotional pressure. The monarchy projected steadiness, but the earrings appeared whenever steadiness required effort rather than confidence. Royal scandals, particularly those that never reached official statements, seemed to trigger their presence. When attention quietly shifted away from one figure, the pearls emerged. When a planned appearance subtly changed hands, they appeared again. They did not announce crisis. They accompanied its management, a gesture positioned between reassurance and restraint. Diplomatic tension inside the family carried the same rhythm. Moments where public cooperation masked private distance were marked by the same restrained symbol. Not defiance, not protest, something quieter. Acknowledgement without declaration. Almost as if a conversation was unfolding in plain sight, but only partially translated. Even more telling was preparation. Reports suggested the earrings were selected before final engagement details were released publicly. Wardrobe planning typically followed established hierarchy and occasion protocol. Yet here, the choice preceded the narrative. The meaning existed before the explanation did. Photography deepened the unease. Without direct focus, images consistently captured the earrings clearly, as if framing itself cooperated unintentionally. No official emphasis, yet never obscured. Visible enough for recognition, subtle enough to deny intention. The kind of presence designed not to attract attention, but to survive scrutiny. And gradually, the interpretation shifted. This was not institutional symbolism, not a message to the nation or the press. It carried emotional weight instead of political clarity. A signal shaped less by duty and more by relationship. The crown remained silent, but someone within it seemed to be answering unspoken tension. Patterns, once seen, refused to disappear. Each appearance now carried memory of the previous one, building continuity across separate events. What seemed like isolated choices revealed a sequence, a dialogue without statements, unfolding across months under the protection of tradition. The deeper the pattern went, the clearer it became. The message wasn't meant for the public at all. A code only works if someone can read it. And the earrings appeared most often when one specific person was not present. Not the public. Not the press. Someone inside the family. The possibility changed everything. The appearances weren't announcements. They were communication across distance. Visible to millions, but meant for one pair of eyes. The realization shifted the entire interpretation. Until then, the pearls felt like commentary on events, a symbolic reaction to circumstances surrounding the crown. But once compared with attendance records, the pattern narrowed. Whenever a particular senior figure withdrew from view, whether through schedule adjustment, unexplained absence, or quiet separation from shared engagements, the earrings surfaced, not immediately, not dramatically, precisely, as if answering silence with presence. Within royal life, absence speaks loudly. Appearances are commitments, and missing one creates speculation the palace cannot openly correct. Direct explanation risks confirming tension. So, reassurance must travel differently. The earrings began to resemble a response rather than a statement, a subtle acknowledgement that something had changed, and that the change was understood. Those raised within the institution learn early that emotion must be contained before it reaches the public. Heirs are trained not merely to endure scrutiny, but to remain steady under it. Yet steadiness requires outlets. Without them, distance becomes permanent. In such a system, communication adapts. Words become rare. Symbols become necessary. Historical precedent whispered behind the pattern. Quiet gestures exchanged across generations. A particular brooch during separation. A familiar jewel during reconciliation. Never confirmed. Always remembered. Not political signals, but personal ones protected by tradition's ambiguity. Catherine appeared to be continuing a practice designed not to influence the nation, but to reach someone who understood its meaning instantly. Palace aides reportedly noticed the timing, but never recorded interpretation. Observation existed without acknowledgement. The unspoken rule held firm. awareness without articulation. Inside a structure where loyalty depends on discretion, understanding is permitted, explanation is not. And beneath the duty lay something deeply human. The monarchy presents itself as a unified institution, yet it remains a family navigating strain under relentless visibility. Conversations ordinary families conduct privately must here occur indirectly, layered within ceremony and routine. The earrings, then, were not decoration. They were a bridge across enforced distance. Their repetition carried emotional weight, reassurance during uncertainty, presence during separation, perhaps even caution when circumstances hardened. Visible to millions yet intimate in purpose, they allowed connection without confrontation. A message delivered safely because no one could officially admit it existed. But if the earrings were a message, the palace response made sense. Silence. Then, one day, without explanation, the earrings stopped appearing. Not gradually, instantly. Scheduled engagements changed styling notes. Archive photos were re-released, highlighting alternative pieces. Commentators suddenly shifted discussion away from jewelry entirely. No announcement, no denial. But internally, something had happened. Because the palace doesn't correct fashion, it corrects meaning. The disappearance was more striking than the pattern itself. Repetition invites curiosity, but absence confirms awareness. For months, the pearls had surfaced only at delicate moments, quiet signals threading through public duty. Then, as discussion around their timing grew more confident, they vanished with absolute precision. No transitional period, no occasional return. The silence around them hardened. Behind the scenes, preparations reportedly altered. Wardrobe selections, once noted in advance, were now handled differently. Decisions narrowed, alternatives pre-approved. Pieces previously held in reserve appeared suddenly more often, while the pearls were excluded entirely. Nothing official acknowledged a change, yet the consistency suggested direction rather than preference. Public messaging followed. Commentators who once casually referenced personal styling began steering away from the topic altogether. Coverage leaned toward schedules, charities, diplomacy, anything but accessories. Questions that might once have lingered were now deflected before forming. Not censored, simply redirected, the way experienced institutions guide attention without appearing to control it. Royal correspondents sensed the shift. The unspoken boundaries around certain subjects tightened. Where curiosity once hovered, restraint replaced it. Not because answers existed, but because persistence itself became inappropriate. When the palace wants speculation to fade, it does not deny, it removes oxygen. Within staff circles, understanding rarely requires instruction. A piece removed from rotation carries implication. The pearls had never been controversial, never extravagant, never politically charged. Their only unusual quality was timing, which meant their removal addressed interpretation, not appearance. The possibility lingered that the intended recipient no longer required the message. Communication, once delivered and understood, loses purpose if repeated. In that light, disappearance felt less like restriction and more like closure. A conversation concluded beyond public hearing. Yet institutions act cautiously only when stakes justify it. Concern grows not from curiosity itself, but from accuracy approaching recognition. If observers were beginning to read correctly, silence alone would not suffice. The symbol would have to be withdrawn entirely. The monarchy could tolerate rumor. It could not tolerate certainty. And that raised a more unsettling question. What exactly had been understood? In a family where feelings cannot be spoken publicly, Symbols become emotional lifelines. The earrings weren't political, they were personal. A way to acknowledge absence without admitting conflict. A way to comfort without breaking protocol. But silent communication carries risk. If the message fails, the silence grows heavier. And eventually, even symbols become forbidden. Royal duty demands composure long before it allows honesty. Every appearance promises steadiness, even when steadiness must be performed rather than felt. The institution survives because emotion remains private, yet the individuals inside it remain human. Somewhere between expectation and reality, pressure accumulates. Words cannot carry it, so meaning seeks quieter roots. The pearls seemed to exist in that fragile space. Not dramatic enough to provoke headlines, yet intentional enough to carry reassurance. They neither confronted tension nor ignored it. Instead, they acknowledged it carefully, offering presence where conversation could not occur openly. A gesture shaped by restraint and by necessity. But necessity is delicate under scrutiny. Once observers began interpreting the pattern, the symbol changed character. What once functioned as comfort risked becoming commentary. Private reassurance transformed into public speculation. And speculation threatens the monarchy not because it is hostile, but because it removes control. The crown must appear constant. Personal expression can exist only until it interferes with collective stability. When individual communication becomes widely decoded, it stops being personal and becomes institutional. At that moment, the palace intervenes, not to silence emotion, but to protect structure. For Catherine, the balance required precision. She carried responsibility not just to her role, but to relationships inside it. Every decision navigated two loyalties, one to the institution that demands continuity, and one to the family that requires connection. The pearls bridged those loyalties for a time, allowing reassurance without confession. Yet tradition and control often resemble each other from the outside. What begins as inherited custom can evolve into enforced limitation. Removing the earrings was not necessarily rejection of their meaning, but acknowledgement of their impact. The message had traveled as far as it safely could. Silence returned, heavier now because it had once been interrupted. Yet even after they vanished, the pattern left behind one final clue. Reviewing earlier footage revealed something overlooked. The earrings were not always identical. A nearly invisible alteration existed. The clasp orientation subtly reversed on certain dates. Not visible to crowds, not mentioned by stylists, but clear in high-resolution photographs. The message wasn't simply presence, it was variation. The code had levels. At first, the discovery felt almost unreasonable. The pearls themselves never changed, their appearance consistent enough to avoid suspicion. Yet the fastening, a detail too small for casual notice, shifted direction across separate appearances. Not random, not damaged, not repaired. Intentional. The kind of adjustment that only matters if someone knows to look for it. Placed beside the timeline, the variation transformed interpretation entirely. Earlier appearances coincided with uncertainty, delicate moments when reassurance seemed necessary. Later appearances carried the reversed orientation, aligning with developments that suggested distance rather than concern. The symbol did not repeat, it progressed. What seemed like a single message revealed a conversation evolving over time. The pattern suggested a simple but effective system. Presence signaled acknowledgement. Orientation refined meaning. Together they formed contrast, affirmation, caution, acceptance. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would provoke immediate reaction. Instead, a sequence understandable only to someone already aware that communication was taking place. The positioning made the discovery harder to dismiss. The earrings were consistently worn in ways allowing clear visibility during official photography, never obscured by styling choices that might accidentally conceal them. Yet there was no announcement, no stylist commentary, no record of intentional alteration. The absence of documentation became its own confirmation. Meaning existed only for those meant to perceive it. Such precision implied preparation. The adjustment required forethought, not spontaneous decision. Someone anticipated how images would circulate and ensured the detail remained visible without appearing deliberate. The balance between concealment and clarity suggested practice. Not experimentation, but familiarity. As family circumstances shifted, so did the orientation. Moments of tension carried one arrangement, moments of resolution another. The message did not remain fixed because the relationship it reflected did not remain fixed. What began as reassurance gradually softened into acceptance, communicated across appearances separated by months, yet linked by structure. Understanding this reframed the earlier silence. The disappearance of the pearls was not the ending of communication, but the completion of it. The sequence had reached its final point. Once meaning no longer required continuation, the symbol returned to being just jewelry, at least officially. Which meant the earrings didn't just speak, they told a story. When decoded as a sequence rather than moments, the appearances formed a narrative. Reassurance, concern, separation, acceptance. A conversation conducted across ceremonies and crowds, unfolding over years without a single spoken sentence. The monarchy showed unity, while privately negotiating distance. The earrings were never rebellion. They were closure performed in public view, while the palace insisted nothing was happening. Seen individually, each appearance seemed restrained, almost ordinary. But together they carried emotional direction. The earliest instances coincided with uncertainty, a quiet affirmation that stability remained intact despite unspoken strain. Later came concern, signaled more deliberately as circumstances inside the family appeared to harden. The earrings did not challenge authority or provoke reaction. They acknowledged reality gently, carefully, almost protectively. As time moved forward, the tone shifted. The symbol stopped reassuring and began preparing. Its repetition no longer calmed speculation, but accompanied acceptance of distance that could not be publicly explained. The crown maintained composure for the nation while privately adjusting relationships within it. Duty required unity, but personal truth required adaptation. The pearls bridged the gap between those obligations. In a family bound by institution, direct confrontation risks permanence. Words create records. Records create consequences. So communication chose patience instead. Each appearance replaced a conversation that could not safely occur in private or in public. Meaning traveled quietly because quiet meaning leaves no evidence. The balance was delicate. Catherine's role demanded steadiness, not disclosure. By using symbolism rather than speech, she preserved both dignity and structure. The message reached its destination without disturbing the institution that surrounded it. In this way, silence became both shield and language. Equally revealing was the response, or lack of one. Absence answered presence. Where acknowledgement might have required explanation, non-appearance allowed resolution without narrative. The exchange remained invisible, except to those searching for continuity. A conversation completed by restraint rather than declaration. Admitting this openly would fracture the monarchy's carefully maintained mystique. The power of royal presence depends on distance from ordinary emotional negotiation. If the public understood that appearances carried private dialogue, ceremony would become conversation, and tradition would become transparency. The institution cannot survive that shift. Its authority rests on symbolism remaining ceremonial, never personal. So the earrings remained pearls, elegant, traditional, harmless, at least officially. Yet their sequence revealed closure achieved without confrontation, a resolution conducted entirely within ritual. Not scandal, not drama, but something quieter and far more human. Understanding reached without a single spoken line, and that is precisely why the palace could never confirm it. If the public understood that royal appearances carry private conversations, every gesture would become a headline, and every accessory a statement. The monarchy survives on controlled meaning. Admitting the earrings were communication would transform ceremonies into negotiations. So officially, they remain pearls, elegant, timeless, meaningless. But sometimes the most powerful words are the ones spoken in silence. The crown has never depended solely on authority. It depends on interpretation. Ambiguity protects it. The moment meaning becomes fixed, it becomes disputable. That is why royal tradition lives in suggestion rather than explanation. The institution endures not by revealing truth, but by allowing many truths to exist without confirmation. Certainty invites argument. Mystery invites acceptance. If symbols were openly acknowledged as conversation, every appearance would demand translation. Every color, every jewel, every absence would provoke interrogation instead of respect. Ceremony would collapse into commentary. The monarchy would be forced into a position it has avoided for centuries, speaking emotionally where it must appear constant. The earrings, therefore, could never be allowed to become language publicly, even if privately they already were. This is why denial is gentle rather than forceful. No contradiction, no clarification, only continuation. By refusing to confirm meaning, the palace preserves both dignity and distance. Observers may speculate, but speculation without confirmation fades into atmosphere rather than accusation. The myth survives intact. Jewelry becomes more than ornament in such a system. It acts as armor. It allows feeling without vulnerability and presence without confession. Catherine's role demanded steadiness above all else, not the loud assertion of personal voice, but the quiet preservation of balance. The pearls fulfilled that role perfectly, communicating carefully while protecting the structure surrounding her. In that balance lies the monarchy's paradox. It must remain human enough to be believed, yet distant enough to remain stable. Too much openness weakens authority. Too much silence erodes connection. Symbols bridge the divide. They offer understanding to those who need it while preserving mystery for those who don't. So the earrings remain officially meaningless. Yet the sequence they formed cannot be unseen once noticed. A private dialogue conducted within public ritual, a resolution achieved without disruption, a conversation carried by tradition rather than speech. Nothing announced, nothing denied, and therefore nothing broken. The silence endures not because nothing happened, but because acknowledging it would change everything. The pearls stay pearls, the ceremonies stay ceremonies, and the monarchy continues as it always has, communicating just enough to be felt, but never enough to be proven. Because in the royal family, nothing is ever said, yet everything is always understood.